I'm standing in the dining room of this beautiful Second Empire-style townhouse in Washington, D.C.'s Logan Circle. From 1943 until 1966, this home served as the first national headquarters for the National Council of Negro Women, NCNW, founded in 1935 by Mary McLeod Bethune in New York City. From 1943 to 1949, this home served as Mrs. Bethune's official Washington, D.C. residence. And in front of me stands a large meeting table with chairs. The table is encircled with exhibit panels that discuss Mrs. Bethune's history and the history of NCNW. Behind me is the bookstore, which served as a kitchen during NCNW's occupancy of the home. NCNW's purpose has always been rooted in leading, advocating for, and empowering Black women, their families, and their communities. The organization used the celebration and dissemination of Black history as a medium to empower Black women and the larger Black community, which undoubtedly influenced archivist and museum founder Sue Bailey Thurman to compile and edit the Historical Cookbook of the American Negro, NCNW's first cookbook, published in 1958. Traditionally grouped by recipes or even sometimes seasonally, Mrs. Thurman organized the cookbook to commemorate birthdays of persons and events important to the Black historical narrative, with recipes that honor luminaries from Richard Allen to Robert Smalls and events from the founding of Black Greek letter sororities to Emancipation Day celebrations. This invaluable contribution to both Black and culinary history is made up of recipes from individual women and women's organizations from across the country, all accompanied by historical narratives and dedications. Longtime NCNW President Dr. Dorothy Height praised Mrs. Thurman for this work, saying her creativity knew no bounds. In this room, around this table, many meetings took place, from meetings to discuss the launch of the SS Harriet Tubman, a World War II Liberty ship honoring the famed abolitionists, to meetings to help organize the 1963 March on Washington. Without question, food was also enjoyed around this table, perhaps even a Daytona Beach orange cake. Hey y'all, I'm in the kitchen now, about to make the Daytona Beach orange cake, one of the many recipes featured in the Historical Cookbook of the American Negro. So to get started, we have the butter here, we have the eggs, and we have the sugar. I'm gonna cream those three things together. That's gonna be the first step in the recipe. The recipe, by the way, guys, it sounds delicious, and I'm really looking forward to making it and looking forward to eating the cake too. But this recipe was submitted to Mrs. Sue Bailey Thurman, the editor of the cookbook, by the Daytona Council, the Daytona Beach chapter of the National Council of Negro Women. So as I said before, I have the butter here, I have the eggs, and I have the sugar. We're gonna get started with creaming those things together. They didn't say to beat the eggs one at a time. They just said to pour them in there. But I kind of have a habit of, beating eggs one at a time, so I'm just going to do that. That's just something I can't get around. So guys, just so you can follow along out there at home, I want to make sure I told you this was 1 1/4 cup of sugar, 1 cup of butter, and 3 eggs. So 3 eggs, 1 1/4 cups of sugar, and 1 cup of butter. Some people might add, but don't take away. So guys, in this bowl here, I have 2 1/4 cups of flour. That's 2 1/4 cups of flour. I have 2 teaspoons of baking powder, a teaspoon of baking soda, and a teaspoon of salt, and they're all sifted together here. 1 cup of buttermilk, and I'm going to alternate in adding this to the cream, butter, sugar, and eggs. The recipe says something, the recipe doesn't say something. It calls for butter in one part of the recipe and then it says shortening. But typically recipes from this era, when they say shortening, they're meaning butter or some other type of fat. But butter was the only fat that was specified. They just called it shortening in another part of the recipe. So I'm gonna, as I said before, excuse me here, pour a little bit of this in here, not too much, and I'm gonna alternate with my buttermilk, okay? I'm gonna do this again, and you're gonna repeat this a couple times, you know, until all of your buttermilk and your flour mix is gone. Okay guys, so now for the fun part, the part that I really like about this recipe. I have 1 cup of walnuts, 1 cup of dates chopped, and I have the zest, I guess, of 2 oranges. I grated the skin of 2 oranges, and I'm gonna fold that into the mix. Kind of like put some there. We'll put all of it there and just fold it into the mix. Guys, I'm mixing in the 1 cup of dates, the 1 cup of walnuts, the peel of 2 oranges, and 1 teaspoon of vanilla. It looks beautiful. It smells amazing, and particularly the scent of the oranges are heavenly. I can't wait to sample this thing when it comes out of the oven. I can only tell you that this must have been one of the hits of the cookbook. So guys, now I'm about to put my mix over into the cake pan. I have a spring foam cake pan that's prepared, greased, prepared, all that good stuff. You can use a baking spray. You can use dust it with flour and shortening, or dust it with flour and use butter. I chose to use a baking spray, but it's already prepared, ready to go, spring foam pan. Just gonna put the mix over in this pan here. Make sure you get all that goodness into the pan there. And there's a special sauce that I'm going to top the cake with, and we're going to make that together too. Just want to make sure you smooth it out across the top. Now it's ready to go in the oven. Hey guys, so now for the sauce. I'm really excited about this sauce. I think this is really gonna make the cake just stand out and pop even more. The recipe actually calls for 3 Daytona Beach oranges. I don't know about you guys, but I'd never heard of Daytona Beach oranges. I went to about 3 stores looking for Daytona Beach oranges and got the blank stare at all 3 stores. So I settled on King River heirloom oranges. I bought 3 of them. So I'm using the juice from 3 King River heirloom oranges and 1.5 cups of sugar for the sauce. That's what I have here in this little bowl here. I've mixed it together. I'm gonna heat that sauce until the pulp is transparent. And then when the cake comes out of the oven, I've got the cake baking in the oven. It's gonna bake for an hour at 375. So when it comes out of the oven, I'm gonna top the beautiful cake with this sauce here that I've just described for you. So guys, the cake is all out of the oven. It's baked at 375 for 1 hour. It looks beautiful. It looks good enough to eat. I have next to it the orange juice and the sugar that I've warmed on the stove and turned it into a nice sauce. And so now I'm just gonna cover this cake with the sauce. And by the way, the cake set for 15 minutes to cool off before I started this portion of the recipe. I mean, it smells amazing. I wish you all could smell it through the camera. So I'm just gonna Pour this over them. It's going to seep into the cake. And I like to punch little holes in the cake before this so the sauce can drip all into the cake. So I punched a few holes in the cake, or poked a few holes in the cake, if you will, so that sauce can get all into it. Just going to let that sit there. And I mean, if you want to let it set for some time, maybe an hour or so, some people might even let it sit longer than that. Just gives all that sauce, all that goodness, a chance to get deep into the cake, and it'll be even better. When I spoke to you all from the Mary McLeod Bethune Council House National Historic Sites dining room, I mentioned to you Sue Bailey Thurman's purpose for organizing and compiling the Historical Cookbook of the American Negro. When I talked about the purpose, I talked about her honoring the lives of black luminaries and honoring events important in the black historical narrative. But I believe Mrs. Thurman had an additional purpose in mind. She wanted folks to stop and reflect on the stories and triumphs presented in the book. She wanted us to consider the richness of the black historical narrative, which is exactly what I did today while making the Daytona Beach orange cake. I stopped and thought about Mrs. Bethune's life in Daytona Beach. How she went to Daytona Beach at the dawn of the 20th century to build a school for girls and to be of service to the community. How she worked to create a hospital for the black community. How she created the Better Boys Club to foster the growth of black boys. And I thought of how all of this must have impacted and influenced the Daytona Beach community. So when the Daytona chapter of the National Council of Negro Women submitted this recipe, I know they were submitting a recipe that represented the best they had to offer.